If you don't know much about the Colony Wars trilogy, get ready to learn a lot, because I've just played through all 3 games on my PS1, and I'm going to share with you what I've experienced in a very detailed way. In a nutshell, these Colony Wars games are story-driven 3D space combat simulators, released between 1997 and 2000, developed by Psygnosis only on the PS1. They have never been re-released, and the franchise never continued onto any other consoles. For the most part, this series has been forgotten about. So let's begin with the game that started it all. I first became aware of the original Colony Wars via an issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly in 1998. Their review crew praised the game, calling it one of PlayStation's best-looking titles to date. Upon seeing that, and having already been a fan of games that take place in space, I went out and bought the game immediately. When putting the disc in for the first time, this is what came onto the screen.
When I was very young, the Earth Empire controlled the skies. The Tsar and his battle fleet saw everything, knew everything, punished everything. Those of us in the colonies never imagined there could be another way. But then, the real slaughter began. Now there are thousands like me, veterans of the League of Free Worlds, who yearn to fight against the savage empire. Famous victory at the Battle of Benay gave us confidence and the time to strengthen our fleet. And it gave our leader, the Father, some reason to believe in the future.
That opening sequence blew me away back then, and got me pumped up to play it. It sounds like James Earl Jones speaking, but it's a man named Bert Caesar. It was rumored that the lawyer for James Earl Jones gave Psygnosis a call regarding the similarity. I ended up finishing the game and enjoyed it a lot. 2 of my PlayStation-loving roommates, however, played it a little but couldn't get into it. Back then I thought that was odd, but perhaps they could sense something unpleasing about it that I did not. As you saw in the opening cutscene, the story has to do with an alliance of oppressed planets, the League, waging a war against their overseers, the Earth Empire, also known as the Navy. As a League pilot in that war, you were put on missions. The storyline of the entire war changes depending on how successful you are in those missions, which plays out through cutscenes that show every 3 missions or so. If you succeed a lot, your side ends up pushing the enemy back into its home territory. If you lose a lot, the war does not go well for your side.
Self-belief was draining from my comrades and myself. And from what I heard, there were those in the fleet that even blamed the Father himself. Now we were heading for the Alpha Centauri.
If you do good on some missions and bad on others, mixed results happen on the war front. Ultimately, there are 5 possible outcomes to the war, told through 5 different endings, one of which is considered the best ending and one of which is considered the worst. Don't worry about spoilers, I won't be showing any endings in this entire video. There are 70 missions, but if you're playing for the best ending, you'll only be seeing 36 of them. The types of missions and the locations in which they are carried out are also driven by how well you are doing. When you are losing, you may be sent on an easier path. You may even end up in a different star system, an easier one. With this type of branching structure, there's no way to see the entire game unless you do multiple playthroughs. Well, there is one other way, but I'll get to that in a little bit. It's definitely not the type of game you can just pick up and play, because you're flying in an open 3D area full of friendly and unfriendly ships. You're following specific mission goals, you're switching back and forth between specific types of weapons that are used for specific types of things, and you're utilizing pretty much every button on the controller. The HUD, the dashboard, takes a while to understand, and don't think the manual is going to help on that one. It lists all the items in the HUD, but when you look at the corresponding screenshot, it's not a picture of the HUD, instead it's something unintelligible. It's very easy to fail a mission by flying toward the wrong part of space, or allowing something to get blown up that needed to stay intact. The bottom line is that new players have a high hurdle to get over. Do you want to play Colony Wars?
Yeah.
Reverse view. No, charge your primary weapon. Now change your secondary to that one. No, your shields are low. Watch out. No, you're aiming at the wrong thing. Go that way. No.
Auto ejection procedure.
She divorced me. To succeed at the space combat, you have to understand how the weapon systems work. Enemy ships have strong hulls protected by strong invisible shields. Certain weapons are good against the shields and bad against the hulls, while other weapons are bad against shields and good against hulls. If that concept isn't fully understood by the player, it causes the battles to last a lot longer than they should. A few weapons are good against both shields and hulls, like this plasma cannon I'm using right here. You may wonder why not just use that one all the time. It's because it's not always a choice. Your commanders choose the ship you are using for each mission, and each ship has a different weapons package. You also carry a limited number of secondary weapons, such as missiles and torpedoes. And just like the lasers, some are better for shields. You also use a grappling hook for grabbing objects, and EMP pulses to disable the electronics on ships. R1 accelerates, and R2 decelerates to the point where you're traveling backward. Most of the missions fall within these three categories: protecting a large friendly ship while it does a task, blowing up a large enemy ship or facility, or disabling a large enemy ship or facility. On almost all missions, you'll have to engage in one-on-one dogfights. If you get entangled in those dogfights for too long, you can lose the mission. So there's incentive to get these dogfights over as soon as possible. Let's do a quick run-through of one mission. It begins with this briefing screen, which tells me what's going on in the war, and that there's a need to destroy a mining station located inside an asteroid belt.
The mining station uses a compressed energy tractoring system to collect ore. Enter the belt and target the mining.
I can skip this briefing if I want to, but I find it more immersive to keep up with the story, and I want to make sure I don't miss an important detail about the mission. When I select Launch Craft, it shows my ship heading for action while the game loads. As soon as the mission begins, I can see the mining station in the distance. I can also see some blinking lights, which indicates enemy fighters. So first, I'm going to engage one of those fighters by taking out its shields with the purple laser, then damaging the hull with the orange one. In other missions, there are friendly fighters that you have to be careful not to shoot. I'm now going to concentrate on destroying the station. I could fight more fighters, but sometimes it's best not to hang around for too long. I start by using some of my secondary weapons, like the plasma torpedo. With the shield down, I am now attacking the hull. I have to space out my firing to keep my guns from overheating. My strategy for avoiding the incoming lasers is to keep going backward and forward. There's some slowdown happening right now since there's so many things on the screen.
Negotiate your way out of the asteroid field and return to base.
Jump gate.
As I mentioned, this series seems to be forgotten. I noticed it has a much smaller digital footprint on the internet than other PS1 titles. There's not that much about it on YouTube, on message boards, and there's not that many FAQs written for it. My goal upon starting this review process was to beat the game and get the best ending possible. But when I got about halfway to that goal, I started losing missions. A lot.
This is command. Comms craft destroyed. Data blocks lost. Mission aborted. Return to base.
If you fail a mission or die, it doesn't give you the option to replay that mission. Instead, it sends you onto another mission. This may send you onto a different path in the game toward a worse ending. Also, you can only save every 3 missions, so in order to make progress toward the best ending, you typically have to win 3 missions in a row, then remember to save. You can technically replay a failed mission, but you have to walk up to the system, hit reset, then reload the last save file by going through multiple menu prompts. The bottom line is that the game's difficulty is hard, and its rules for continuing make it even harder. Due to my inability to make progress past the middle of the game, I decided to delete my save file and start from the beginning all over again. And it worked. I was able to drive through the game and get the best ending. No cheats or tips from the internet. I won't show you the ending, but I'll show you what happens afterward. It gave me a map of all the branching paths in the game. They should just have this available at the beginning of the game just to show you how big the game is. The path I took is highlighted in white. There's one entire solar system I didn't even get to see. This full map only appears if you get the best ending. If you get any of the other endings, it doesn't show the paths not taken. It just shows the one you did take. The cool thing about having this full map is that I can now jump into any of the game's 70 missions and play them. I can also watch all the endings. As I looked at this map, it got me wondering, if the path I took turned white, what would happen if I jumped back in and played through all the other routes, turning every path white? I wasn't able to find anything about it on the internet, so I felt it was my obligation to see what would happen. Perhaps a new mode unlocks. And so, I jumped into different parts of the game and took different paths, sometimes intentionally losing missions. And here is the result. All the paths are highlighted, and guess what happened? Nothing. At least now we know.
The 7 planets of Galania were extinguished as the invasion threat grew. We even built anti-reflectors over the phosphorus lakes of...
As a space science fiction fan, I enjoyed the realistic feel of the space battles, even on the outdated technology. And I enjoyed the storyline. I felt like I was watching a movie. The overall presentation is probably the best you'll ever find in a game of this era. That includes the music, the sound effects, the look at the solar systems, the look at the ships, and even the look at the menus. It's obvious that this game was a labor of love of those who worked on it. Blowing up the big ships never got old. There's an intense satisfaction as they fly apart, and their various fragments explode. The music adds a movie quality to it all.
Nowhere left for the League to hide. The Tsar knew it too. His failed attempt to virus bomb Iris must have hurt him badly. We knew he'd want revenge. Diomedes was resource-rich and fertile. That much he'd want to save. But as pilots...
As you've probably already noticed, this is a dark game, visually. I had trouble seeing things in the blackness of space, so much so that I had to turn up my TV's brightness, which turns black space into gray space, but it helped. What's amazing is how bright the game gets when you fly toward a star. It makes you feel like you're getting blinded by glare. It sounds distressing, but it's actually quite beautiful. It's something I don't see a lot in other PS1 games. Although the game features some of the best graphics on the PS1, there are moments where the game just has trouble handling it. You saw some of the slowdown earlier. That's something that happens a lot throughout the game. And sometimes I noticed my shots were not registering on the target. About those mission briefing screens, the talking goes on for too long. The man doing the voice sounds convincing, but he stretches his sentences out.
Network inspectors within Acheron Zone report potential...
It doesn't give you the option of speeding them up. You either hear the whole thing or you cut it short. If you cut it short, you gotta be careful because you might miss some details. The menu system does a good job of simulating a computer aboard a ship. Deep within the menu is tons of details about the planetary systems, right down to the details of the planets themselves. It even talks about the moons. It's like Wikipedia in space. There's also a listing of all the ships you encounter and operate throughout the game, which includes some interesting details.
This unit includes a self-lubricating insert derived from the compound Cortidext.
So let me get to the verdict. Is this game fun to play today? I would say yes, with a lot of asterisks. As I mentioned earlier, it took a lot of perseverance to get good at the game, but it's rewarding in the end. The one-on-one dogfights are fun as hell once you master the speed changes, the weapons timings, and the turning. With that being said, Colony Wars' mastery bar is so high that most people are not going to want to go through with it. It's just not an accessible game, and I believe that's the main reason people don't talk about it much today. There just aren't enough people that would want to dedicate themselves to it. The difficulty is sky high in some spots. The save points are too spaced out, and there's no easy way to replay a mission. The missions themselves don't have much variety to them. They all kind of play out the same way. In the end, Colony Wars was revolutionary for its time. Since then, better space combat games have been developed. It catered to a small crowd in 1997, and 20 years later, its reach is even more limited. I only recommend it to retro gamers who have an interest in space battles, such as the ones you see in Star Trek or Star Wars.
Not much to trouble us this time.
Today we're going to look at Colony Wars Vengeance, the second game in the trilogy. We'll also take a quick look at a similar game called Blast Radius. Back in the day, I was a big fan of the first Colony Wars game, so when Vengeance came out in 1998, I purchased it right away. I don't remember a whole lot about it, but there was one thing I can recall vividly. There is a mission that is so hard, I never got past it. The mission involves grabbing asteroids with a grappling hook and flinging them at a large ship. I could never get it to work. I remember thinking the mission was only about halfway through the game, so I was angry at the time, spending money on a game that I never got to play all the way through. Going into this review, I actually had some dread about possibly running into that mission again, especially since I'll be playing for the best ending. Hopefully with more life experience, I'll be able to do it. The game takes place 100 years after the first one, and is told from the vantage point of the other side, the Navy, which was defeated in the first game's war. The good guys and the bad guys are basically switched, and it seems like there's some revisionist history going on about the past war. I find that to be a very entertaining concept. What if they made a Star Wars movie where the Empire was the good guys, and the Rebellion was a bunch of terrorists? I actually think it might work. After the League's victory 100 years ago, they left the Navy's system, the Earth system, and sealed it, so that the defeated Navy couldn't leave its own solar system. This caused people in the system to fight amongst themselves. They eventually united, and now seek to break out of the solar system and seek vengeance against the League, punishing them for what they did. The story has a darker tone than the first one. Some of your leaders are very concerned with internal security, so sometimes you have to carry out missions against your own people. Sometimes your superiors disappear too. The structure of the game is the same as Colony Wars 1. You participate in missions in order to move the storyline toward different conclusions. There are 40 missions in all, compared to 70 in the first game, and there are 6 different endings compared to 5. Having 30 fewer missions may make it seem like a shorter game, but it's not. They make up for it by making each mission more complex, and much longer to complete. They have you doing all kinds of stuff, such as fighting large creatures, solving puzzles, using stealth, flying inside of things, and conducting ground-based assaults. It's a much larger variety of things to do, and more settings to do them in. Typically there are multiple goals within each mission. The mission briefing gives a lot of detail, but sometimes it seems to leave out critical bits of information. I had serious problems figuring out what I'm supposed to do on a lot of occasions, and found myself going through a lot of trial and error. This didn't happen that much in the first game. In one sequence of missions, I had to expose traitors aboard a fleet of ships. How exactly this was supposed to be done wasn't fully explained. I eventually was able to muddle through it, but only after peeping at some gameplay footage on YouTube.
Probe complete.
The save structure is identical to the first games. You get to save about every 3 missions. This once again creates an enormous difficulty curve for those who are seeking the best ending. There is once again no way to replay a mission also. I eventually got to that asteroid mission that caused me to rage quit decades ago. It was just as difficult and esoteric as I remembered. The mission objectives are destroy defense turrets and destroy mining installation. As the mission starts, you see the mining installation in the distance. There's a 5-minute time limit at the top of the screen, so there's a lot of pressure. Since mission objectives have to be followed in order, you must first destroy the turrets. They surround the ship, and if they happen to be firing at you, it's hard to avoid getting hit. The thing is, after you destroy them, they respawn. I don't think there's any way to completely destroy them all. Perhaps they want you to just destroy some of them. But no matter how I go about doing it, the game never acknowledges that I've completed the first objective, and I end up wasting a lot of the 5 minutes I have. So after many tries, I started ignoring the turrets, and instead concentrated on destroying the installation, which is a whole other challenge in itself. When you shoot at it, the computer tells you that you cannot destroy it with conventional weapons. Only a large impact will have any effect. This means you have to use the grappling hook to tow asteroids and slam them into the ship. So I began towing the asteroids to the ship and releasing the cable. But they don't keep their momentum. They just come to a dead stop. Look how close this one is that I towed. I've never been in space, but I'm pretty sure if you tug on something, it keeps moving.
Scans indicate a small defense turrets field guarding the installation.
So here I was again, stuck at the same part of the game, just like I was in 1998. But during one of the many times I restarted the mission, I noticed some words that appeared on the screen for about 4 seconds. Try heating up asteroids. If you blink, you'll miss this clue. So I started heating up the asteroids by firing on them until they turned red, then towing them like before and flinging them at the ship. But they still didn't seem to be connecting. That's when I decided to check YouTube. So what you have to do is heat the asteroid, start towing it, but don't release it. Instead, fly right past the ship and make a bunch of sharp inward turns toward it until the asteroid clips the ship. I found it best to fly through this little gap in the ship and then make an abrupt turn, but sometimes that doesn't work at all and I have to make additional passes. If you're successful, you'll hear this noise. You have to do this about 6 times, which is a lot to do in 5 minutes. Plus, the turrets in the ship are constantly shooting at you and the asteroids. It was a pain in the butt and took a whole night, but I finally beat the mission.
Lead mining installation has been eliminated. Return to base for further instructions.
It was a proud moment, but I wasn't too happy when I saw it wasn't going to let me save the game afterward. I had to complete one additional mission on my first try in order to get a save point. Thankfully, I pulled it off. There's obviously an unevenness to the difficulty. It took me 20 years to beat one mission and then 6 minutes to beat the one after that. Another difficult to comprehend mission is this stealth mission right here. It says to evade sound-sensitive security, but it doesn't tell you exactly how that's done. There's a noise gauge at the top of the screen, but it's unclear how much noise causes you to be detected. Even when I was being still, I was being detected. There's searchlights too, and I'm not sure if they have anything to do with noise detection. But sometimes the lights shined on me while I was moving, and nothing happened, while other times they shined on me and I got detected. Just like the asteroid mission, I beat this one by completely ignoring the first objective. I just flew in as close as I could while being detected and launched the probe that was needed to win the mission. In the end, I was able to finish the game and get the best ending. It once again unlocks a map, which allows you to take other paths to other endings.
Deep in enemy territory, I feel more alone than ever.
The best way to assess this game is to have a direct comparison to the first one. Let's start with the cutscenes, which I feel were a step down. The ones in Vengeance are more personal, but less epic, and a lot shorter. The narration for them is very low-key, in contrast to the thundering voice of the first game. It's your own character talking out his inner thoughts, and most of the time there's no music.
We head for the first colony, Alpha Centauri, a legend. Our chance to reclaim it.
I just didn't care much about what was going on. Despite all that, the storyline in Vengeance takes a number of sharp, unexpected turns. It's not just told through cutscenes, but things that are told in mission briefings, and things that happen during the missions themselves. There's an abundance of what the fuck moments. The way you fly through space is pretty much the same, though in Vengeance you have an afterburner, which gives you a temporary boost of speed, and once spent, you have to wait for a meter to fill up again. This is a great addition to the game, allowing you to jump from target to target quickly. The first game gave you certain ships for certain missions, but in Vengeance you unlock several ships as the game progresses, allowing you to choose which one you want. However, it's logical to just pick the most recent one you unlocked, as it's always the most powerful one. Also totally new is the ability to spend tokens to customize your ship, to a certain extent. You earn tokens by succeeding at missions, and can distribute them among 4 categories. I like this addition to the series, because if you're trying to get past a tough part of the game, you can try different combinations to see what works best. Vengeance builds on the vast number of weapons and tools in the first game. There's now a leech beam that sucks energy from an enemy's shields and gives it to you. In some missions, it can also download a virus. There's also a seismic lance, which is like a giant lightsaber sticking out the front of your ship. The biggest addition though are the pods, which are little robotic helpers you can launch.
Pod released.
The graphics are an upgrade to the original game. Large facilities have more detail to their textures. Despite those asteroids that you saw earlier that lost their momentum, the physics seem a little better. In the first game, whenever I flew up against something large, I would sometimes get caught on it, and ricochet back and forth. But this didn't happen as much in Vengeance. There's now planetary missions. I only saw 2 of these throughout the game, as they took the route to the good ending. They don't look that good, but they add variety. I believe this game runs at a slower speed, which is probably an adjustment they had to make to get rid of the slowdown experienced in the first game. However, this ground mission you see right here is very slow. It feels like you're flying underwater. The odd thing is that the second ground mission I experienced didn't have the same issues. The sound quality is equal to the first game, but sometimes when you destroy an enemy, he yells out in a way that's very out of place for this game. Let's compare the overall gameplay to the first game. Vengeance is a harder game to get through, but I feel it plays better. Missions are not as repetitive. In fact, I wouldn't call them repetitive at all. There's so many different things they have you doing. The flying and fighting is a little more engaging. It's hard to pinpoint why, but I suspect the controls are tighter. The best part of the game, much like the first one, are the one-on-one dogfights. The Psygnosis employees who worked on this game were inspired by the Windows game X-Wing vs. TIE Fighter and the movie Top Gun. The biggest down points of Vengeance are that you can't replay a mission, the save points are still far between, some missions are confusing, and it lacks the cinematic feel of the first game. With all that being said though, it's still better than the first game. It's more refined. I'm glad I got to play it. Before I move on to the third Colony Wars game, let's talk briefly about Blast Radius. I happened to see this on my shelf and looked at the back and noticed it's a mission-based space combat game released around the same time as Vengeance and was developed by Psygnosis. Did they repackage some of the Colony Wars assets to make an extra buck? Well, I played it for a little bit, and while it resembles Colony Wars in concept, the graphics do not look derivative. Compared to Colony Wars, it looks and feels like a discount space game. It wasn't fun to play, but then again, I only played it for a short while. I might play it again one day. So let's move on to Colony Wars 3 Red Sun, which I've never played before until now. The Roman numeral 3 only existed on the packaging of the American version. It isn't shown on the title screen. I guess they didn't want us Americans to be confused when they saw all 3 games on the shelf. Red Sun is quite different than the other 2 games. It's totally rebuilt from scratch by a different team at Psygnosis.
All I knew was this. On one side, the League of Free Worlds. On the other, the colonial navy. The result? Total war. Back then, we were told that the final battle was beginning.
Once again, war rages between the League and the Navy, but now you are a mercenary, accepting missions from both sides, as well as missions from other factions operating in space, such as pirates and scavengers. Some of those missions are also given to you by a mysterious man who wants you to track down and investigate a large ship called the Red Sun. The branching storylines are gone. This time it's one big journey from point A to point B, although it's not entirely linear. You can now pick and choose what missions you want to go on. You can skip a lot of them, but certain ones you have to beat in order to get to the next section of the game. Each time you succeed in a mission, you earn money. You can then use that money to buy better ships and upgrade the components on those ships. It's basically a light version of Gran Turismo in space. The money is a good incentive for not skipping missions. In fact, I ended up playing and finishing every mission in the game, 45 in all. If you play as I did, it's a longer game than the first two by far. Each ship has a limited number of slots for holding weapons and other components, so there's a layer of strategy in deciding which of the components to buy and bring into missions. Some missions require you to use certain items, such as grappling hooks, so you're forced to buy them. You can also sell items you no longer need, and you can sell your outdated ships too. If you perform well, you'll go up in rank, and with each promotion, more ships and more components become available. There are over 40 components total, including different types of lasers, pods, missiles, devices that reduce heat, and devices that enhance shields. The developers heard complaints about the first two games regarding how you have to constantly switch between shield weapons and hull weapons. While that wasn't always the case, this time around there is something called a general purpose laser, which can be used the entire game. It's good for both shields and hulls. I used it for my entire playthrough, and near the end I was able to strap 3 onto my ship at a time. It felt a little like cheating, but it's nice not having to switch weapons so often. If you're someone who preferred the weapon switching aspect of the previous games, there are still plenty of specialized lasers that allow you to do that. When it comes to difficulty, Red Sun is an absolute picnic compared to the other two games. As soon as I started playing, I tore through the first 6 missions without dying or failing once, and without taking much damage to my ship. For the remaining 39 missions, I probably beat half of them on the first try. Granted, I did start playing this game right after completing the first 2 games, so I had a good amount of practice under my belt. The underlying controls are pretty much the same. In general, the difficulty starts very low, then progresses very gradually. This is in stark contrast with the first 2 games, where the difficulty fluctuated up and down throughout the game. Some missions in Red Sun did give me difficulty, causing me to replay them multiple times, but it was my own fault and not because I couldn't comprehend the objectives, like what happened in Vengeance. It does a good job in describing the objectives. Once you accept a mission, they spell out the objectives in simple terms, then give longer descriptions of each one. It also gives a lot of background about every nuance of the mission, and the different enemies you are going to encounter there. When you get to the loading screen, it shows the objectives one last time. While I enjoyed having all the details, there's no voiceover or music while you read through it all, just gentle background noise, which acted as a natural sedative. While the second game in the series had a wider variety of missions than the first, Red Sun takes mission variety to a whole nother level. You got the standard blow something up missions and escort missions, but you also have ones that include the following: recovering an artifact, sneaking into a secured area by hiding behind a cargo ship, protecting a stranded pilot from incoming creatures, locating and revealing cloaked ships, and participating in a destruction derby. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't fail until 7 missions in, and when it happened, I got a big surprise when the game told me I had failed. The one thing I wanted the most in the first two games is now a reality, a mission replay option. Not only that, but you can now save your game after every mission. You no longer have to successfully complete several consecutive missions in order to save. It's another thing that the development team wanted to change due to the feedback they were hearing about the first two games. The number of enemies per mission is now higher this time around, but they move more slowly and the AI isn't as smart. Enemy pilots tended to ignore me while they concentrated on other targets, allowing me to swing around and take them out. When they did come after me, it was very common for them to bump into my ship, something that rarely happened in the first two games. This made them easier to dispatch, because after they ricochet from your ship, they become stunned for a moment, allowing me to kill them. It's so one-sided sometimes, I felt like I was committing massacres as opposed to fighting battles. To make things even easier, your ship regenerates its shields, so if they get depleted, you can dart away for a little bit while they recover. So what's the verdict on Red Sun? They definitely overcorrected on the difficulty, but when considering everything else about the game, I thought it was the best of the series. Let's start with the graphics. They are just flat out better than the other two games. They have more detail and more variety to them. You get to see many different types of enemies who use an abundance of distinct looking ships and facilities. Outer space just feels like it has a lot more going on in this game. When you flew up to the large ships in the first two games, their laser shots looked like they were coming through the hull from inside the ship. There were no discernible cannons that the laser shots were coming from. If you wanted them to stop shooting, you had to blow up the whole ship. In Red Sun, however, the lasers come from visible cannons, and those cannons can be destroyed without taking out the whole ship. It feels more realistic, and it provides a layer of strategy. You often have to decide whether to take the cannons out first, or just go for the whole ship. Another good thing about the graphics is that things are more clearly visible against the background of space, because they don't use as much black. Most of the space battlefields have a hint of color from a nebula or whatever. No adjustments to the TV were needed this time. The ground-based missions look way better than they did in Vengeance. They cover larger areas and are full of interesting little enemies like walking robots. It's still PS1 era graphics though, drenched with fog and very hard on the eyes. The game obviously pushed the PS1 to its limits, but I don't recall any moments of slowdown at any point in the game.
That night, I reckon I'd sleep like a baby.
The cutscenes look about as good as the other two games, but the story it relayed was much harder to get into. It felt disattached from what was going on in the missions, and sometimes I just didn't understand what was happening.
It was as if the generals Taki and Engram had opened up a million secret files in my mind. Every synapse, every neuron were striking sparks so bright they hurt.
It should be noted that Psygnosis outsourced the FMV work, as opposed to the first two games where it was done in-house. As far as the music, I thought it was the best of the three games. I found myself humming it when I was taking a walk in the park. It was recorded from a live orchestra, the Midland Symphony Orchestra to be exact. Having the ability to earn cash and buy components was a great idea. With so many options to choose from, it allows you to customize your ship for your style of play. It also makes you want to replay the game with different configurations. It's even possible to equip your ship with nothing but missiles, if that suits your style. I will say that the component configuration screen, where you buy, sell, and equip these components, is very clunky to work with. It forces you to sell through one part of the menu and install through another. There are so many items to dig through too. The little symbols representing each thing look very similar to each other. When a new item becomes available, it doesn't tell you what it is or where to find it on the list of things. So you're left digging through everything until you notice something that wasn't there before. That being said, the other menus in the game function very well, just like the other two games in the series. And the memory card access has been slightly improved. It doesn't take quite as long to reload your save. Despite the AI needing some improvement, the enemies are still fun to hunt down and destroy. Their high numbers means there's a lot less idle time, and a lot more blowing up time. The option to save after every mission, and the ability to replay a lost mission, were huge steps. Yes, it's an easy game, but Colony Wars Red Sun is my favorite of the three. If you're looking to play one of these games for the first time, I obviously recommend Red Sun due to it being better overall and lower difficulty. Bear in mind though, not everyone thinks the third one is the best game. Here's a poll I found online. It doesn't have a high number of respondents, but as you can see, the opinions are split. Regardless of which one people prefer, the entire Colony Wars trilogy feels like a tragedy. A lot of heart was put into making these games, but they have been seemingly forgotten. I'm happy to have played them, and I'm happy to have shared them with you. Hello everybody, this is 2023 Kevin, and I just wanted to add an update to the end of this triple review. By the way, everything you've seen up to this point is a set of reviews that I did several years ago. You kind of heard me say that this has been a forgotten franchise, but in 2021 I started to see some news about a new Colony Wars game. When I dug into it, I found out that there is a guy with a handful of programmers, and he's trying to propose a remake of the first two Colony Wars games using his team. He's trying to propose it to Sony to release. And he's also wanting to do a third brand new game in the Colony Wars series. So it would actually be the fourth game, but from what I heard, he's not going to remake Red Sun. This guy had a website, a YouTube channel, and he also provided a demo, and what you're seeing is the footage from that demo. It plays pretty good, especially when you consider it's a demo. It still needs a little bit of work, but it's basically a remake of one of the missions in Vengeance. At some point, they stopped releasing new information about this. Their website no longer works. They haven't uploaded a new video about this project on the YouTube channel. They've also have not updated their Discord with any new information. Sony either told them to stop doing this, or perhaps they're still talking to Sony and these things take a long time. But anyways, I'll leave a link to this stuff in the description of this video. I hope you enjoyed everything that you saw today. May your games make you happy and smart, and may people respect you for playing them. So long, everybody.
Hostile tribal vessels destroyed. Return to base.